Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Diverse Goddess. It's Hannah, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the idea that we are all one and what that really means. So I'm going to be breaking it down for you guys so you can not only understand what it really means, but also why it is that we are all one. So grab a drink or a snack or whatever it is that you need, because it's going to be a bit of a long one today, but we're going to get into it, so keep watching. So I said I would explain in detail what this concept or idea that we are all one really means, because again, this saying gets thrown out there a lot and it sounds good. You know, we hear, oh, we are all one, but a lot of times people don't really understand what that means. They just know it sounds good. So like I said, I would explain it to you guys in detail, so here we go. So to understand this idea that we are all one, we first have to start with source. And when I talk about source, I'm talking about the source in which we all came from. And so source was something that always just existed. And when source first existed, it just was whole and it just was there. And then source, I guess you could say the first thought that came to source was this idea of I. And so source wanted to know who this I was. And so in order to understand who this I was, it divided itself, or it broke up into fractals, because it wanted to get to know itself. It wanted to see itself. And just being a source on its own, you can't really see yourself. Like even yourself as a person, the only time you can see who you are is either you look at somebody else or you look in the mirror or whatever. You can't really see yourself. And so source wanted to know itself, see itself, and to understand this concept of who this I was. And so like I said, it divided itself and it broke off into fractals. So to give you a visual, so I'm sorry if this is backwards, but so say this is source, right? Source is whole. Right? Source is whole. And so as soon as it had this concept or this idea of I, that was the first split. And so now you have one side and now you have another side. And that broke off, or it divided itself into two parts. And then it continued to divide itself and break off into fractals. And just to see it from another perspective, this is actually how we get the concept or the idea of the flower of life. Source started off as whole, then it divided itself into fractals, into more fractals, and then eventually you get what we call the flower of life. So not only did source divide itself and break off into fractals, it broke off in many forms. And so that means it broke off into, say, a human form, an animal form, plant form, because source wanted to experience itself, know itself in every single possible way imaginable. So that means the trees, the animals, you and I, or every single person walking this planet, or whatever form source is coming in, it doesn't matter the form, because whatever form it's coming in, that is source experiencing itself from different perspectives and different angles.
Do you see what I see? I don't know what you see, but what I see is me. I see me too.
But regardless of how many times source divides itself or breaks off into fractals, or regardless of the form it comes in, all of the forms is an expression of source, because it all comes from the same source. Hence, we are all one. Another way that you can look at it is you can look at sources like one big puzzle. When all the pieces of the puzzle are together, it creates the whole picture. It creates the whole image, but it needs all the pieces together to create the whole, and every piece contributes to the whole. And so it doesn't matter if it's a human, an animal, a plant, they are all pieces of the puzzle that creates the whole, because every piece is a part of the whole. So now that we have the idea that everyone is one piece of the whole, or everybody is a piece of source, but together we create the entire source, if you will, hence we are all one. But like I said, source wanted to get to know itself, and it wanted to get to know itself through different angles, different perspectives. That's why it comes in the form of plants, it comes in the form of different animals, and even within humans, we all have different experiences, but every experience that a human is having is still a perspective of source. Now, I'm going to give you a visual to understand this concept. So, for example, let's say you go to the theater, right? And you go and see a show. This is the stage, and then you have people in different seats, right? So these are the lovely people in different seats, and then this is the stage. And everybody's watching the same show, and that show is called life. So the reason why I give that example of people watching a theater show is because when you go to the theater, everyone sits in a different seat. And so everybody has a different perspective of the same show. And like I said, the show is going to represent life. And so if you sit in the front row, for example, you have a perspective of what watching the show or watching life is from the front row. Now, if you're sitting in the back row, you have a perspective of the back row. Or if you're up in the balcony section, then you have a perspective of being in the balcony. And so even though everybody is watching the same show, everybody has a different perspective depending on where they are sitting. And depending on where you are sitting, you're going to have a different experience, and you're going to have different insight and a different take on the play. Like someone sitting up in the balcony is going to have a different perspective, a different experience, a different viewpoint, all of those things than somebody who's sitting, say, in the front row. But regardless of where you're sitting in the theater, whether it be the front row, back row, up in the balcony, every position, every viewpoint, or every seat is still source experiencing itself from a different angle. And that's what source wanted to do. It wanted to experience life from every single angle. So that's how source is getting to know itself from all the different angles, from all the different forms that it comes in, and all the different viewpoints in which source is viewing life, and that life is itself. And so that life is still one. We are all one on this planet. And so regardless of where you sit in life, you are still source experiencing itself, but you are experiencing it from where you sit. And on top of that, every single person is adding to the show, if you will, or what we see on the stage. And how we all add to the stage collectively, because you could kind of see the stage as the collective database. And so every single person, regardless of where they sit, each person is like a projector. The mind is a projector projecting onto the stage, so to speak, because we're using the theater analogy. So every single person, their thoughts, their actions, their beliefs go into this collective database that we're all experiencing. And so we are all influencing what we see. So the theater analogy is just one way to explain how source is experiencing itself from different angles, different perspectives, and whatnot. And so that's oftentimes why when I share what I do, I will oftentimes say from my perspective, because I am source. But I'm talking from my experience, where I sit in life, my gifts in life, and all of those things. So I am one perspective of source, and I'm sharing that with another part of source, which is you guys. And so when I say I'm giving my perspective, I'm just sharing where I sit in the theater. So not only do I have my own perspective of where I sit in the theater or where I sit in life, every single person that I come across to is not only me because they are a part of Source, but they are a different part of me that they're having their own perspective and their own experience of life depending on where they sit in the theater. And so it's through each individual person or animal or plant or whatever it is, it's through each person that Source not only expands, but that Source evolves. Because you are not separate from Source and Source is not separate from you. So when you evolve because you are a part of Source, Source is also evolving. And like I used the puzzle analogy where each person is a piece of the whole and that whole is the Source, just like Source has many different pieces and can divide itself, a person can be divided. A person can be fractalized within themselves. So each person has to be whole to be that whole piece to then add to the collective whole, if that makes sense. So what happens when a person becomes fractaled or divided within themselves? That usually happens through trauma. That's why you'll hear people often say, I feel broken, hence a piece that's become broken. And so if a person through trauma becomes broken, so then healing brings those pieces back together. And so each person, as they heal, they become whole again, and then another person becomes whole, and all the pieces start fitting back together. But oftentimes we see Source as something that is out there, something we have to reach for, or something we have to obtain because it's, again, out there and separate from us. But Source is not separate from anybody. It's within us. And not only is it within us, it's in everything that you can see, and it's in everything that you cannot see. So that's also why I say when I listen to other people talk, I appreciate hearing other people's perspective and other people's stories because I see it as another part of myself that's out there sharing to me their experience and where they sit in life and their life experience. Because even my pets, for example, my 2 cats, they are also me, but they are experiencing themselves as a cat. Or, you know, if you have a pet dog, then it's experienced itself as a dog, but it's still you, and it's still you having a different experience from a different perspective or different angle. That's why a lot of times we will often hear and that saying, what is it, that everybody has their own story, and it's absolutely true because everybody has their own perspective and their own story and how they see life from where they sit in life. So I hope that was clear in terms of we are all one and the different perspectives, and Source wanted to get to know itself from every angle, etc. So another way I want to explain that we are all one and how we truly do affect each other, I want to give the visual of, say, the universe or the earth was all one body, and every single person, animal, everything basically is like different cells within that body. And even though we are different cells within that body, it's still one body. And let's say that body, that one body, gets a virus in its left hand. And it doesn't matter if there is no virus in the other hand. Just because there is a virus in this one hand, it will affect the entire body and how it functions. So this idea that we are separated is in fact an illusion. And it's an illusion because, like, that's why I use the body analogy, because when something goes wrong in one part of the body, it affects the entire system. And so if somebody feels separated or disconnected, it's because there is something inside of them that is separated or disconnected. So let me take this a little further or explain this with an example. So for example, let's take people that you feel closest to, usually your closest friends or your family. And you feel a sense of connection to these people because you have shared history, you have memories, you feel like you know them, and you feel like they know you. So that creates this feeling of connectedness. Now, let's say you meet somebody who's a stranger on the street. You don't feel connected to them because you don't know them, etc. And so therefore you see them as separate. You see them as other. And yes, in today's world, it's best to get to know people because there's a lot of unhealthy people walking around. But even with that said, even though you might not feel a sense of connectedness to somebody like a complete stranger because you don't know them, that does not change the fact that you are indeed connected. It does not change the fact that they are still a part of Source that you are also a part of. So they are you in another form. You just haven't met that other form yet, or you haven't gotten to know that other form yet. But either way, it doesn't change the fact that everything is still connected. They are still a part of the one. So it's actually an illusion that you see them as other. Yes, you feel more close and connected to your family, and you would probably, stand up for your family or take care of your family to oppose to a stranger. But that stranger, in truth, is no different than the person you feel close to. Because again, everything is one. Everything is connected. And like I used the body analogy, that we're just many cells within the body, and if one part of the body has a virus or pain, it affects how the entire system starts to function because of that one source of pain or virus. So that stranger and you are still affecting each other whether you realize that or not. So you don't just affect those closest to you. You could actually be affecting somebody who you don't even know in the world or universe or whatever it is, because everything you think, everything you feel, everything you do affects the entire universe. And even the word universe, it starts with the word uni, which means one. So everything in the universe is one, not just everything on the planet or on Earth. So now I'm going to give you some examples of how this plays out and how we, in fact, affect each other. So not only do I want to explain how this can play out collectively and how we affect each other, but I also want to stress how important each individual person truly is, especially if you are somebody who does not feel important or does not feel that you matter in the world. I'm about to break it down and show you exactly why you are extremely important, because there's a lot of people I sense feel that they're not important and they feel like, oh, it's just little old me. What can I do? I'm not, like I said, important, but you are. Okay, so remember this visual I had of the theater, how everyone in their different seats, again, it's different perspective, different angle of the stage or the show that they're watching, and that show or stage is life, and how we're all contributing to that show through our thoughts, because our mind is a projector that projects into the world and creates what we all see. And I call that the collective database. So we are all contributing to the collective database. So I want you to remember that. So the reason why I want you to remember the collective database that we are all contributing to, each individual person is contributing to, is because I want to share this next thing in terms of healing. Now let's say on the planet, nobody has ever healed. So we're just a bunch of broken people walking around and nobody has done the process of healing. And because of that, because nobody has healed, the collective database does not have that information in it to be tapped into. I mean, of course, source is always there, and source is infinite, and healing and all that stuff is in there, but no person on the planet has tapped into it yet. So let's say down the road, somebody, one person does tap into that source to be able to heal themselves. And because that one person has been able to heal that themselves, they change their frequency, which then changes the collective database. And the ability to heal is now, guess what? In the collective database. And because it's now in there when it wasn't before, because of this one person, it now makes it easier for someone else to tap into that collective database and be able to heal as well, because the collective now has that coding or that frequency. Because as I've mentioned, as we evolve and as we grow, so does source. So when we expand, source also expands. So that one person may then go and teach other people or show other people how to heal. But let's say they never spoke to anybody. Like they just healed themselves and they just decided to live off grid or whatever and just kind of mind their own business. Even if they never spoke to another person of how to heal, because that frequency is now in the collective database, like I said, anybody can tap into it now, and they can now access the same frequency because of that one person. But that's the effect of positive influence from just one person. So that one person has now affected the collective database frequency field, if you will, because now the frequency of healing is now in there because somebody has now achieved it, and it makes it easier for someone else to access it. And let's say that person then heals, they then make it twice as much easier for someone else to heal. And so it just multiplies on top of each other. And so that energy naturally grows from person to person. And the more people who tap into that frequency, the easier and the more that healing frequency will grow. Now, that's on the positive side. Now, this has the same effect, but on the negative side. So let me give you an example of how that plays out. Now, let's say somebody in life, something happened to them, and that resulted in them becoming a pedo because, let's say, it was a result of trauma. So because they are now a pedophile, or have the energy of a pedophile, that frequency then goes into the collective database or the collective consciousness frequency field. And so now somebody else who could be on the edge of being a pedophile, hasn't been pushed over the edge, let's say, they haven't acted out anything, but they have that in them. Somebody, say, in another state, because the person who is a full-blown pedophile, that energy is in the collective database, that energy then affects the person who is on the edge of being a pedophile, and it'll push them over the edge because of that energy that the full-blown pedophile put into the collective frequency or the collective database, if you will. And so the same concept happens on a negative level. So the more people, and I'm just using a pedophile as an example, so let's say that person doesn't heal or get that taken care of because they are full-blown. They make it easier for someone else to become a full-blown pedophile, and then that frequency grows, and then that frequency makes it easier for somebody else. So the same thing can happen, but on a negative level. So that's how you affect somebody on a collective level, even if you never meet them. All of your thoughts, all of your actions, all of your desires, everything you do goes into the collective database, that I'm calling it the collective database, or the frequency field, because again, every thought, every action has a frequency. And so therefore that frequency goes into the collective to everybody, and it affects everybody. So that's how you affect somebody, even if you are not close to them, even if they're in another state, even if you never meet them in your entire life, energy is never lost. And so nobody's energy is ever lost. It just, like I said, it goes into the quantum field, or I keep calling it the collective database that we are all tapped into. And that is also why just one person makes a huge difference. That's how important each individual person is. So if you ever feel like you are not important, or the actions or the things that you do not matter, like let's say you're a very kind person and you're always very giving, and sooner or later you might get burnt out because maybe you're not getting, or feeling like you're getting reciprocated for that. I'm here to say that even if you don't see the return right away, to keep being that kind person, because not only does the universe pick up on it, and like I said, the quantum field, the frequency field, the collective database picks up on it. If you don't do those things and one day you just say, oh, this is a waste, being kind, or being of service, or whatever it is, you get down on yourself, right? And you say, I'm just going to give this up and I'm just going to throw it all away and stop being myself. You are taking away from the collective when you do that. And so don't ever think that any act of kindness, any act of love, or anything like that that's on the positive side goes to waste. Like I said, even if you don't see the return right away, it absolutely affects the entire universe, not just everyone on the planet, the entire universe, and nothing goes to waste. Now, I want to share one more example of how not only are we all one and we're just basically each other in different forms, but how this plays out. Again, I'm going to use a marathon runner as an example. So up until 2019, in terms of marathon athletes or Olympic athletes who ran or run marathons, nobody ever completed a marathon under 2 hours. Then in 2019, there was a man who broke that record and did a marathon under 2 hours. So before this one man who broke that record, the collective consciousness, the collective database, did not have that information yet. It did not have that coding yet. But because that one man did a marathon under 2 hours, he now makes it easier for someone else to not only run a marathon under 2 hours, but to maybe even break his record, because he now put that information, and Source now has that information, that it is now possible to run a marathon under 2 hours. Source now knows that it's possible through that one guy. And not only that, but does that mean you have to become a marathon runner and break records and all that stuff? No, because this is, again, we are all each other in different form. So because that one guy broke a marathon under 2 hours, that is a part of me in him that broke that record as well, even though he was the one who did it. And everyone has different gifts. Everybody has different attributes that they contribute to the whole. But everybody, if you look at them as just you in another form, having different gifts, having different experiences, different perspectives, that is still you. And so that guy ran a marathon under 2 hours. In a way, that is you running a marathon under 2 hours. So the reason why I wanted to share that story is because if you ever feel like, say, jealous or envious that somebody else is doing something that you maybe always wanted to do or whatnot, you shouldn't, because I shouldn't say shouldn't, but I just mean it's pointless, because that is also you, So that is why you should be supportive of other people, because when they win, you also win. And everything you do, like I said, never gets wasted. Everything you think, every action you do, every act of kindness that you do never gets wasted. And you not only make it possible, you are telling Source and the collective consciousness what is possible. And like I said, the more people or the more energy on a more positive side, I don't like to say like, just all positivity type of thing, but the more kindness, the more love, all that stuff you put into the collective consciousness, the more that energy builds and it affects other people. And so they will naturally get sucked into that vortex of energy, so to speak. But the same thing can happen on the negative side, like I mentioned with the pedophile. So the more darkness that's on this planet and the more negativity that we have on this planet can also affect everybody. Hence, you can get sucked into that vortex of energy. And that's, if people don't feel they're being affected by everything on the planet, some people can say, oh, I feel like I had a great childhood. And you may have. But you might just not understand why you feel depressed or why you feel heavy or all those things. It's because you're being affected by the collective consciousness. You're being affected by that collective database or that collective quantum field. But when you do something that is maybe not done before, like say the guy who broke a marathon under 2 hours, when you do that, you now like I said, you let Source know that it is possible and that it is achievable, and anything and everything is possible when it comes to Source. And now I'm going to give an example of a more recent thing so you guys can see how this has really played out in our lives. So let's say we go back, like say 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the power of manifestation was never really a thing. Even if the power of manifestation existed, it wasn't really in the collective yet. Meaning it wasn't like mainstream. It wasn't considered normal. And let's say you were somebody who talked about it 30 years ago. You might have been seen as crazy or out there or, just, talking hogwash or whatever it is. But now, fast forward 30 years into the future, which is around now, because it has been talked about so much and because people have brought it to the forefront and brought it to the attention of people, this understanding of the power of manifestation, it is now considered normal. But that is because it went into the collective consciousness or the collective data field. And even myself, I will use as an example. Like back in my day when I was growing up, I was very much into astrology. I was very spiritual, even though I wouldn't have called it spiritual. I just was myself. But back then, it was not seen as cool. Actually, I was seen as like an odd duck or, the black sheep or whatever you want to call it, not just within my family, but within the community, in school and everything like that. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about the things that I understood or the things that I felt, but I always was this person. But now, fast forward to today, it is actually seen as, normal or even kind of trendy now. And in some ways, it did kind of annoy me that like, spirituality and all those things are seen as cool and trendy, but that's only my own hurt talking from back in the day. Because in truth, deep down, I'm actually extremely happy that it's becoming more and more popular, if you will, or at least for people to get on the path or understand that it's even a path or a thing. But it's a little annoying because it's like I always was this person and now it's seen as like a trend. But like I said, that was my own hurt talking. Because back then I was very misunderstood and like I said, like the black sheep and, almost outcasted basically. But now, people are celebrated for it. But that is because the reason why it is so normal now, and this is my point, is because one person has come forward and started talking about certain spiritual things or certain concepts, and then that energy went into the collective data into the collective data field. And so it made it easier for someone else to come forward. It made it easier for someone else to come forward. And even if they didn't come forward, just their frequency alone, having certain thoughts or certain concepts, like I said, even if you were a loner and you just, minded your business for the rest of your life, that information is still in the collective data field, and everybody is still being affected by that energy, whether you realize that or not, because that energy is now in the collective and anybody can tap into it. And so the more people who evolve, the more people who expand, that energy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually other people fall into that vortex of energy. So I hope my examples are giving you more of a clear understanding, not only why we are all one, but how we affect each other energetically and collectively. And we affect each other collectively for the positive and also for the not so positive. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this with the body analogy and having like the pain or the disease in one hand. Even on a negative level, yes, if you have a pain in this hand, it affects the entire body in a negative way, even if this hand feels nothing. And like I said, it'll eventually be in the hand, and then it could grow into the shoulder, and then eventually it could take out the entire body. But if you heal what's in the hand, everything else will fall into place too. So it'll heal the shoulder and the body will bounce back. And so that's also why it's important for each person to heal, because when you heal and come back together, and all your pieces come back together, because you are one piece of the collective whole, but if you're broken into many pieces, you have to put your own piece together. When you heal, not only do you make it easier for other people to heal, but you make it so everyone else will fall into place as well. So yes, we affect each other whether you feel it directly or not, or whether you know somebody or not. And that's why, like in my video where I talked about scapegoated children on a global level, I haven't gone into great detail about trafficking and all those things. But even all of that that's happening on the darkest level of humanity, all of those things should matter to the collective, because it affects the collective whether they realize it or not. And just to put it bluntly, all the kids who are being trafficked or trapped in cages underground, they are basically caging the light of this world, because children are a part of the light and the extreme positivity of this light, and would balance out the world more or less. But because they are caged, we don't get that energy right away. But anyway, I will do more videos on that topic another time. But my point is, even if, like I said, the trafficked children or the children who are being enslaved and abused and all those things, or even your neighbor, for example, and you feel it doesn't affect you, it absolutely does. And as I've mentioned, even if you felt like you had a great childhood or you have a great life even now, and some days you feel depressed or some days you feel off and you don't quite know why, because you're like, well, I can't see any direct reason for why I feel this way, it's because of the collective consciousness or the collective database that everybody is tapped into, whether they realize it or not. And that's what you're being affected by, and that's what you're feeling. You are feeling the energy and being affected by the darkest parts of humanity, and that is what you are feeling. So with the last part of this video, I want to explain one last thing of how this plays out in another way that consciousness plays itself out on a collective level. So this next explanation, or next thing I'm going to share, is also going to show how we are all responsible of what takes place on this planet. Okay, so we have the majority here, or we'll call this the majority, the masses, and they are contributing to the collective database. Now, the masses, or the majority, consider themselves normal. They consider themselves a bit righteous. However, within the majority of people or the masses, they will have a lot of blind spots. They will have a lot of things that are unconscious. And so those things that are unconscious absolutely get played out. How do they get played out? Because these unconscious parts within the masses gives birth to, say, criminals. They give birth to, say, pedophiles. They give birth to a lot of different things. Now, why would it give birth to a criminal, for example? Let's say within the masses, they have a blind spot and they reject a certain type of person. That person, because they feel that rejection, may then go out and commit some crimes due to that rejection for whatever reason. It's a form of trauma. So criminals, or what we call criminals, are just physical manifestation in human form that are playing out the collective or the masses' fears in unconscious parts of themselves. Okay, so we have the masses in the middle, right? Like I said, the criminals are the collective manifestation of the fears and the shadow parts or the blind parts of the majority. And so they're on this side of the spectrum while everyone else is in the middle. Now, on the other side of that spectrum, you have the so-called people that we consider extremely gifted or extraordinary, like that guy who ran a marathon under 2 hours. He would be considered very gifted, extraordinary. And so he would be on this side of the spectrum from the majority or the masses. And so these people represent what is possible, what the collective is able to achieve. They represent what is possible. To make it more simple or more understandable, what I will say is, if there are blind spots within humanity, like I said, the unconscious parts of humanity, guess what life and consciousness will do to show us that we have blind spots? We will literally give birth to people who are blind. And if we don't hear something, or we're not hearing something, guess what life and consciousness will do? We will give birth to somebody who is deaf, to show us we are deaf somewhere. Because we are blind, deaf, or unconscious somewhere within the collective. And so we give birth to somebody who's actually blind, or we'll give birth to someone who's actually deaf to show us that physically. It's the physical manifestation of that unconsciousness. So therefore, if we have pedophiles or killers, that means as a collective, we are sick somewhere within the collective, or we are killing ourselves internally somewhere within the collective, because that physically is being physically manifested on the outside. The same thing goes for war. When we produce war or we go to war as a collective, war is a physical manifestation that people on an individual level have a war going on inside of them. And so therefore, that is going to get manifested on the outside. But the same can be said if we have people who are awake or who are evolving and all those things, then yes, we will have physical manifestations of those as well. That's what we call miracles, when people say, oh my God, a miracle happened. Because in reality, that also exists within the collective. So miracles are just a physical manifestation of what we are capable of and what is possible. And then the very last thing is that just because you die one day, that doesn't mean that you do not affect future generations, or that if you just die, that your responsibility is now over. Everything you do in this lifetime not only affects this lifetime, but affects many lifetimes. And that's where you get into generational things and all that stuff. And, you know, it's in our DNA that gets passed on, and lineage and all that stuff. But again, that's its own video in itself. But everything you do not only matters, but it affects all of the universe and all of existence, not just in this lifetime, but in many lifetimes. Or I shouldn't say many lifetimes, I mean any life that comes after you. So what you do on this planet with your life today, in this life, you will affect whoever comes onto the planet in the future. But anyway, to wrap up today's video, I hope today's video was helpful in understanding why we are all one. And not only that we are all one, but how we affect each other and how that plays out. And we affect each other whether we know each other or not, or whether you feel connected or not. And this idea that we are not connected is actually an illusion, because we are all the same life, or a part of the same life force, experiencing itself in different forms and from a different perspective and a different angle. And not only that, but that each individual person is so important, because one person has the ability to change the entire quantum field collective database. So if you don't feel you're that important because you're just one person, I hope today's video made you see that that's not the case, that you are extremely important. And so on that note, I'm actually going to end today's video. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!